My name is Gasia Mikaelian, and I'm coming to you through KTVU Fox 2 News in the San Francisco Bay Area. Today, we are talking about work during the pandemic. I'm happy to welcome to this conversation Ahmad Thomas, the CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. So, first, let's start with the mission of your organization. What do you do?
Well, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, we're one of the oldest, most influential business organizations in the region in the state of California. And we represent the largest employers in Silicon Valley on the most important issues facing our region, the business competitiveness issues, infrastructure, quality of life, policy, and business leadership. So it's been a pretty busy 6 months. I've only been here 6 months in this new role.
That's right. Probably feels like 6 years. For many people who know Silicon Valley, even around the country, it's known for really being the hotbed of technology. Tell me, how has the tech workforce changed in the past year?
Yeah, I think in so many ways, COVID-19 has really accelerated trends that were perhaps already in place pre-pandemic. And for the companies that have been most successful in being able to harness this innovation, they put themselves on a much more competitive plane going forward. So I think COVID-19, we've hit an inflection point where there's great opportunity for companies that can harness new technologies. Also, a great amount of, I think, challenge from a management standpoint, productivity, output, et cetera, managing through some extremely difficult times.
Let's talk about the workers first. When it comes to working from home, do you have any sort of number or idea of how many Silicon Valley workers are now work from home?
Well, I know for our largest companies, non-essential workers have been working from home since last March. And we've had our companies leading the way in ensuring we have safe worker protocols, safe reopen protocols. And I think it's been pretty visionary, especially looking at our largest companies in Silicon Valley, how they've moved quickly to manage employee safety. And so the vast majority of executives that I speak with representing our large technology companies have the majority of their workforces working from home at
For
this
many
point.
people, for many people, it was a sudden work from home switch. I mean, of
Right.
course, a lot of tech workers had the luxury of working from home before, but a lot of us heard, okay, starting tomorrow, you work from home.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it certainly was. And I think companies that had good processes in place, especially management teams that had strong communication structures, they were well positioned to handle such a change, I think, in work modes. You have to look at how you manage, those teams that were much more focused on output rather than face time or other metrics that may be less accretive to performance were best positioned to do well. So I think there are a lot of lessons that we can take away from this time from a management standpoint, but also lessons learned for better opportunities for our companies going forward.
So if there is a CEO listening today who might be, hopefully not, but in this position, let's say, 100 years from now, what would you say to that CEO who might be faced with a sudden pandemic and a drastic change in working from home?
For us, it's been all about communication and really putting employees first. These circumstances, as we all know well, are incredibly serious. We have employees with families, employees who are managing health conditions for family members or perhaps for themselves. So I think really being authentic and letting employees know that their well being comes first and foremost, and that there's an understanding that output is the core focus. If you've got to do work at night when kids go to bed, that perhaps might be different because you're teaching your kids in Zoom school, which I've been doing. Big shout out to our teachers who are the incredible heroes throughout this pandemic. You've got to be understanding. So having clear, open channels of communication, being flexible on how work gets done, and really measuring output as opposed to how the work gets done, to me, are the most important factors.
I know a lot of parents said that they were reluctant to even say anything about, oh, my child is sick, or oh, my nanny can't come today. They would just call in for a sick day on their own. Do you think that this pandemic has perhaps, you know, revealed a little bit of honesty that may have been good to have even before the pandemic?
Oh, it definitely has. As CEO of this organization, I've had to deal with that when we don't have help with our kids. My wife is a physician, so she's been very much involved, being at the hospital often on most days through this pandemic. So our roles have flipped, and I've had to be very open, very vulnerable, and very authentic with my team. Hey, from 10 to 12, I've got to help my one of my boys on Zoom school, for example, and just learn for teams to be more flexible. But again, always be output focused, not how the work gets done, but just ensuring it gets done in a manner that comports with the lives of our employees.
I know that Silicon Valley and I mean the country has been through drastic job losses. A lot of companies cut jobs early on. I just saw one broadcast company, Sinclair, said it's cutting 5% across the board. How's your group dealing with these job losses?
Yeah, I think it goes back to companies making decisions to stay as competitive as they can. So, where companies can harness this technology, there's opportunity. There's opportunity for persons with disabilities to perhaps contribute more within their given roles in companies. There's opportunities for more diversity, where we can look at other regions of the country and bring those employees in where it's lower cost where they currently reside. All of those things are positives. But there's no doubt that there's a destruction that's been wrought in our economy, especially for non-white collar workers. So it goes back to me to be able to harness these hybrid work technologies in a manner that's accretive and adds value to the companies, but also in a manner that's taking this innovation and being forward thinking. These modes have not been employed before to the level they have today. And it's really calling for a change in mindset and a change in approach.
Silicon Valley isn't a baby anymore. You know, it's kind of like when we used to think millennials, I think, oh, they're all 21 years old. Millennials are in their late 30s now, right? So do you think what Silicon Valley was, let's say 2 years ago, the somewhat mature, robust region that it was, do you think Silicon Valley has changed or is going to remain changed for the foreseeable future because of the pandemic?
Well, I think there's tremendous opportunity if we look at companies like Zoom, as you and I sit here on this platform, of what has worked well in this pandemic. But where I'd sound a note of concern, which isn't related to our technology companies, it's more a note related to our community members. COVID-19 has really shown a spotlight on our vulnerable communities, communities of color, our service workers. And I think we've got a lot of work there to approach solutions with an equity lens. I hope it's an opportunity to come back better and stronger than we were before, but that's where my deepest concern is for our community. Workers who don't have the luxury of working from home or hopping on Zoom to get their work done.
And so many of those workers who can only do their jobs in person were either forced to stay on the job because they didn't have an option of just quitting for their own safety. What are your concerns for, the thousands of bus drivers and, grocery store clerks and, gas station attendants in the South Bay?
Yeah, the primary concern right now for me, I would say, is around vaccine and vaccine dissemination. I would applaud the governor on the steps that the state is taking to ensure communities most in need, those community members get the vaccine. And also, I am concerned, especially for communities of color, that there is fear. I'm not saying it's unwarranted, I'm just stating what exists in our communities fear about getting vaccinated. So I want to ensure for anyone listening to this interview to know that these vaccines are safe. They're needed for us to move forward and for our economy and our communities to recover. And I really do hope that all of our vulnerable members of our communities, our workers, our older employees, essential workers, get vaccinated.
When it comes to working from home versus coming to an office every day, do you get the sense that workers are itching to come back or they're just fine to stay home or something in the middle?
Well, I'd say it's something in the middle. There's certainly benefits when you look at our traffic, when you look at commute patterns, when you look at the ability for quality of life to be at home with one's family. That's not discounted. But I would also note that there are tremendous benefits to working in person. When you look at innovation clusters, when you look at synergies on work teams, that's very hard to replicate in an online environment or via online platforms. For our team, I know that we have a very close set of employees. So we're itching to see each other, many of whom haven't seen each other in several months. So I do agree that it does touch on both sides.
Yeah. But then I also think about what reentry to the workplace might look like. I haven't seen some of my best friends at work in almost a year now, but in a way I'm nervous to see them, which even feels strange admitting.
Yeah, that is true. And we've tried to think ahead by making contingency plans about how our office might open. It may look different. We may have shifts where you have smaller groups of people in the office at one time. We need to ensure we have social distancing maintained, at least for the near future, we are assuming when we reopen. So there are going to be work modes and work patterns that are very different than we've operated before. We try to address that with great communication, with proper planning and strategic thinking, but it certainly will be a change.
One of the things that I just have been, you know, One of the things that's been very difficult for me to replicate during my work from home months has been the idea of collaboration. A Zoom call doesn't do it. A phone call is a little better, but nothing beats, running into a couple friends in the newsroom kitchen and hashing out a great idea.
That's very true. Now, there are great apps and tools that we use for whiteboarding and other things to try and replicate that. But being able to do that in person, I found for me is most effective. And I think that speaks to why a hybrid work model will probably be something that's a key part of our future going forward here in Silicon Valley.
So many Silicon Valley companies, especially, and tech companies in particular, talk about company culture, right? Are you a good fit? Can you hang out? Do you ride a scooter? Do you bring your dog to work? Do you brew kombucha? Um, do, how difficult has it been for companies in Silicon Valley to preserve their company culture when everyone's been flung to the winds?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love dogs, not so much on the kombucha, but the company culture. I think the question is so good because that's extremely hard to build. Companies that have a very strong culture, companies that have great management teams, have strong metrics, strong output measures, can survive and thrive and do very well. I think crises like this really highlight those companies who have very strong internal controls and cultures. I think for companies that do not, it presents more challenges and more challenges for management teams where communication isn't very strong or metrics and output measures aren't very clear. So certainly it has I think here there's an opportunity for companies to see where things may not be going well and try and address them.
What do you say to workers who are at home, feeling alone, fearing for their jobs, and not wanting to speak up because if I admit to the boss that I don't feel like I'm doing my best work, he or she might sort of see me as one who doesn't need to stick around.
Yeah, another very good question. What we try to do is have multiple levels of communication. At minimum, to be communicating with your colleagues if you're uncomfortable, if something's not working well, if you're very concerned, to make sure you have a pod of two or three workers on your team that you can communicate with, your manager being in close contact with you with check-ins every week. And ultimately, I tell every member of our team, they have my personal cell phone, call anytime. There's no judgment as we're all dealing with the pandemic that has hit people in so many ways. And so you have to be flexible. And I think as I talk to CEOs of our leading companies about their coping strategies, I truly get the sense that Silicon Valley is a leader in that respect because we are adaptable and we do know how to utilize technology to drive strong output and results.
What's the biggest challenge for Silicon Valley CEOs in this next year?
Well, I think there's several. There's a lot of uncertainty as you come out of a pandemic. Certainly, we have the economy and how we are able to rebuild and build back better. To me, one of the biggest questions is really getting the vaccination process and those logistics completed well and what that timing looks like. I think as we get through that, there's an entire inflection point going on for our economy around our tax structure, around policy related to infrastructure, our immigration planning and structure for federal policy. So uncertainty to me for business leaders is one of the biggest challenges that we need to manage. With certainty, we can plan and develop strategic plans. And here, coming out of a once in a lifetime pandemic, there's far less certainty than obviously we've had in the past.
Do you think a lot of these tech firms, largely who have decided to either allow the employee to choose if he or she wants to work from home for the foreseeable future, maybe forever, or those who've said, you know what, you don't need to come back at all? Do you think we're going to see a lot of empty office space in Silicon Valley?
Well, I think that can certainly be a concern because it has ramifications far beyond just that company for the vendors, for the small businesses, for the restaurants within our cities, within those work clusters, for our transportation. When you look at Farebox for our transportation agencies, all of those are very serious concerns. So I do think there will be a shift. I do think there certainly will take some time for things to return back to normal, but I do see this shift as being a hybrid mode where we have companies harnessing this technology to do well, offering opportunities for more distance work and distance opportunities while not replacing in-person opportunity and work.
I feel like for so long we just wanted to get back to normal. And now hopefully we've realized that whatever we get back to isn't going to be like what we left.
Yeah, you're right. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. We have multiple vaccines. The shots are going in arms. And I think being optimistic, I'm hugely bullish on the future for Silicon Valley, seeing where technology can play into our future and how we can come back better and stronger and more equitably coming out of this once in a lifetime horrible pandemic that's wrought such destruction.
Is there anything you want to say in particular? We've talked a lot about CEOs and managing. Is there anything you want to say to the typical Silicon Valley worker?
Well, I think there are a couple things. One is to express gratitude, to say thanks for our workers being so flexible, for doing such a great job in such trying circumstances. And beyond our workers in Silicon Valley, as I say, I'm married to a healthcare worker, to say a huge thank you to our healthcare workers who have kept our communities afloat, literally by keeping us safe. Our elected leaders who have worked so hard to provide solutions, and our teachers who get a huge shout out from me as my kids are sitting in Zoom school now, who have had to deal with tremendous challenges in educating our youth.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to add on the topic of Silicon Valley and work after a year of pandemic living?
It's been a hard year, but things are getting better. Things are getting better. We do incredible things in Silicon Valley. That will not change. And as I said, I'm hugely bullish and optimistic about our future. I'm very grateful you reached out and we had this time this morning.
Well, I'm so glad that we talked. It's, this, my roller coaster of emotions is beginning to flatten out a little bit. And I think, I have hope in going back at least to my own newsroom. And then I think hopefully whatever we come back to in some ways might even be better than how we left it.
Exactly. And that's my approach, that we've got much coming out of this pandemic that we can do better as we have the spotlight on equity, the spotlight on how we harness technology to do better for our companies. I think there are a lot of positives we can take away from it. And frankly, when I look at situations in life where you've got a challenging set of circumstances, you got to make the best of it and be better coming out of it. I know Silicon Valley will. And I'm very, very excited for things to get back to normal and for our future.
Absolutely. Well, Ahmad Thomas from the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, I appreciate all your time today. Good luck to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.